Welcome back to the world of AOTP news. Let's jump right into it. I recently held an online tournament where the objective of each game was to destroy the opponent's Planeswalker. Planeswalker Assassination. 6 players entered the tourney. In this video, I will review and give my thoughts on each of these armies. So here we are with the first army I'm going to review. This one has Sorin as the Planeswalker. The creatures are Evasion on Bloodied Wings, Rock's Veterans Squad, and Restless Zombies Squad. For the spells, we have Corpse Lunge, Corrupt, Killing Wave, Altar's Reap, Blessing, Not Forgotten, Divine Favor, Marked by Honor, Chaplain's Blessing, Angel's Mercy, Near-Death Experience, and Skillful Lunge. I'll be frank, player skill notwithstanding, I think this army was the least likely to win the Planeswalker Assassination tournament. Sorin seems to mostly thrive in heroes-only builds in my experience, and the player here has axed the typical Eldrazi Ruiner in exchange for the Rock's Veterans and Restless Zombies, making this build a mixed squad hero thing with a very toolbox spell deck to go along with it. I don't personally love the idea of these kinds of spells which only work with one type of either squads or heroes, but not both at the same time, and putting them into a build which is basically comprised of 50% squads and 50% heroes, because it tends to lead to bricking in either the very early game or the very late game. For instance, we have cards like Skillful Lunge, Divine Favor, Marked by Honor, and Blessing, which will only work with the squads, while Angel's Mercy and Chaplain's Blessing only work with the hero. This means that when your opponent kills, or at least heavily neuters, either all of your heroes or all of your squads, they've also effectively destroyed those spells which only work for those specific categories of creatures if you hadn't had the chance to play those spells yet. Unfortunately, I just don't think these kinds of mixed armies tend to do well in AOTP, although I do think they are amongst the most fun armies to theory walk and play. I just think it's a cool concept to mix your Planeswalkers, your heroes, and your squads all together. It's just a shame there's not more to incentivize that kind of playing in AOTP as it is. So this build, I see the potential to steamroll with highly enchanted stacked buffs, Rock's Veterans, again with things like Blessing and Divine Favor to get their power and their toughness really high. There's some synergy here with Not Forgotten with the squads to buff Sorin so that he can devour hordes of figures. And I do love when the Not Forgotten synergy works, especially with something like the zombies, which can respawn constantly on top of Sorin's ability to heal. But I can't get over how bad the Rock's Veterans are, just in general, for 90 points. They bring so little to the table for 2 colors which already severely lack mobility and range. But if I had to guess, Evasion was probably expected to carry a large chunk of the weight here, since she's basically the only really mobile figure that can ignore the opponent's front line. But altogether, my suggestion to make this army better, well, I mean, number one, just choose to either go almost completely all squads or almost completely all heroes. It's always cute, and I wouldn't blame anyone for doing this, because this is something I did for a while when I was playing white, especially, is I would mix, Evasion plus Rocks plus Hookers plus Hookmasters, but it just does not work well, unfortunately, against armies that are better optimized to say go all squads or go all heroes. So I would highly suggest you choose to go all squads and craft your spell deck to then assist your squads, or go all heroes in your creatures and then craft your spell deck to assist your heroes. But at a minimum, if you'd like to keep this build of creatures to have this mixed squads and heroes thing, You definitely got to drop some of those cards like Angel's Mercy and Blessing. Like, for instance, for me personally, I would get rid of Angel's Mercy in exchange for Healing Salve. White's Healing Salve it is literally creature agnostic. It just says remove 2 damage from one of your friendly creatures, and then you get to draw a card on top of it. Healing Salve would be a perfect fit for this build. It would do its job no matter what, where Angel's Mercy bricks the moment Evacuant dies. And then in another example, we have Blessing. Like, say let's drop Blessing, and instead we add Inspired Charge, which is slightly different, and I can understand why you might want to use Blessing over Inspired Charge. But Inspired Charge at least gives it really gives all of your figures, again, or it gives all of your creatures the buff for until end of turn. It's not an enchantment like Blessing, and I'll freely admit that yes, Blessing has uses over Inspired Charge, but Inspired Charge again is the creature agnostic spell. It just says, hey, all of your creatures get it. So it's like you can use Inspired Charge and then take a turn with Evasion and have her go slaughter a bunch of shit, or you can use Inspired Charge and take the turn with the Rock's Veterans. So Inspired Charge can assist both your heroes and your squads as you wish. But altogether, for the competitive purposes of this tournament, I'd give this deck 3 out of 10. This is a pretty uncompetitive deck, unfortunately. The next army from the tournament is a mono red Chandra build. For the creatures, we have the Flamewing Phoenixes, the Mad Prophet, and the Goblin Javelineers. For the spells, we have Tool Casting, Fire Breathing, Stubborn Resilience, Chandra's Outrage, Chandra's Fury, Senseless Rage, Twin Flame, Circle of Flame, Seize the Day, Stensia Masquerade, Nahiri's Machinations, and Burn at the Stake. So this army altogether is probably low to mid tier in my opinion. I've never been a huge fan of Chandra, and I think that's mostly because her range is only 5, and she's a Planeswalker that generally wants to be aggressive, but she can't really be aggressive herself until mid to late game, because if she walks within 5 spaces of an opposing Planeswalker, that means they can summon creatures on top of her and put her in a bunch of engagements. And red, as it stands, doesn't have any way to wipe mass creatures out from around their Planeswalker. But also red has no way to give their Planeswalker disengage or get their Planeswalker out of a sticky situation. So Chandra is rather committal in my opinion. Yeah, she's got the dice and she's got the big attack numbers with her creatures, but there's a little bit less mobility and range in red in general. So I've just never loved red, although there's a lot of potential here, especially if they get higher ranged figures. So for this army in particular, I actually really like the combination of Nahiri's Machinations and Chandra's Fury to help guarantee that Chandra will be rolling at least 4 dice 2 times every time she takes a turn to attack. Twin Flame and Seize the Day are probably one of the biggest reasons why I think Chandra decks have any real chance in most scenarios. And dual casting also helps here, as it's an excellent way to double pump those powerful spells. Stubborn Resilience plus Phoenixes is a pretty good combo with potential to snowball in the mid to long kind of games. But I've never put a lot of stake into the Phoenixes in general because of how easy they are to kill. Over time, I think my opinion on the Mad Prophet in mono red has been waning quite a bit. This goes back to my earlier discussion about the Sorin army problem, where we have this army where we spent a reasonable number of points on a hero, but red might even be worse at it because they have even fewer ways to support heroes at all, where white has a reasonable number of spells which can indiscriminately help their heroes and their squads both at the same time. So this deck has only 4 spells which can directly be used in tandem with the Prophet. We have Burn at the Stake, Senseless Rage, Circle of Flame, and Chandra's Outrage. The good thing here is that those same 4 spells can be used with the squads as well. So again, this is like another... those spells don't care whether you have a hero or a squad. It's just as long as you have a creature. So it's not all bad for those spells. But we still have to go to the other side of the coin, where if your squads get wiped out, now there's 8 other spells which don't work with the hero. So now there's if your squads get wiped out, you'll be left holding the bag with spells like Twin Flame, Stensia Masquerade, Seize the Day, Stubborn Resilience, yada yada. You guys get what I'm saying here. Those spells can no longer serve you if the Prophet is your last creature standing. So there are some minor issues with this deck, but altogether, honestly, I'm pretty impressed with this deck, given that it's mono red Chandra. This is about as good as it gets. I'd personally still swap the Mad Prophet with the Bloodline Nobles, simply because it's another squad, and Nobles are still pretty reasonable when you can stack power on them. And then I'd also strongly consider replacing the Javelineers with Blazing Firecats, although that's a much lesser problem with this deck in my opinion. The Javelineers are quite fine as a combat force. But I think the biggest upgrade that could be made to this deck is drop the Prophet, add the Bloodline Nobles. Most of the cards here, everything's pretty good. I'm not a fan of Stensia Masquerade. If I had to pick a spell out of these that I don't really like, it's going to be Stensia Masquerade. Never been high on that card for almost any reason. For the tournament, and therefore the competitive format, altogether I'd give this army about a 5 out of 10. It can win games. It's swingy, it's red. It's basically a coin flip whether you're going to win or you're going to lose, in my opinion. The next army I will review is Mono Black Liliana. So this army has the Restless Zombies, Ghoul Vanguard, and Blighted Reavers as its creatures. For its spells, it has Killing Wave, Altar's Reap, Crippling Blight, Rise of the Dark Realms, Painful Truths, Dark Harvest, Duress, Liliana's Caress, Mental Agony, Barter in Blood, Bone Splinters, and Corrupt. So this is basically what I would call a standard Liliana and Zombies build. Liliana is the lowest costing Planeswalker, and she's honestly really formidable despite her cost. The 3 zombie creature cards all get +1 toughness from being near her, and they aren't affected by the Blighted Reaver's aura or Killing Wave, and the 2 zombie squads can move, or one of the zombie creatures can move when the Ghoul Vanguard moves. So there's a lot of cool synergy in this deck. I think it plays pretty well altogether. Duress, Liliana's Caress, Barter in Blood, and Mental Agony. I'm going to jokingly call it Mental Agony instead of Mental Agony. We got 4 cards in this deck which can cause a discard, which this can definitely help tilt matchups in Liliana's favor if the opponent loses their powerful cards, especially the stuff like Titanic Growth or Twin Flame, which could be their big win cons that they need to burst Liliana down. And then Liliana, this army, it has its own big kill potential with Duress and Dark Harvest and Rise of the Dark Realms. But the main issue is that all of your zombies are very slow at move 5 and only a range of 1. So Liliana is often saddled with the weight of killing enemy ranged figures, and sometimes even the Planeswalker if it's something like Nissa. And for Planeswalker Assassination meta, I think ranged squads are extremely relevant. Ranged figures in general, I think, are relevant for the most part in AOTP anyway. I think if I had one qualm with this deck, it is probably the lack of Despise. I think Black's Despise enchantment, which gives -1 power to an enchanted Planeswalker, is one of Black's better cards. And I'm not sure what I would drop from this deck for it. I would probably drop Mental Agony, maybe Crippling Blight. I really like Despise to assist in the Nissa matchup, because I think Nissa can be one of Liliana's harder matchups. It's a very tight matchup, I should say. The mono green versus mono black. But I without Despise, I think it's pretty solidly in Nissa's favor. With Despise, I think it tends to lean Liliana's favor. But Despise also helps a lot against Chandra and Sorin, because those are two walkers who really like to have high power stats for their multi-attacks. Yeah, Despise is the one big missing piece for this deck, in my opinion. The rest of it is pretty good. This is pretty much what I would play as Liliana Mono Black. Altogether, for the format, for a Planeswalker Assassination format, I'd give this army a 6 out of 10. Again, heavily brought down by the fact that zombies don't have any range and they're move 5. Next army from the tournament. This is the army that I created for the tournament. Arlinn. For creatures, this army had Eldrazi Scions, Flamewing Phoenixes, Goblin Javelineers, and the Bloodline Nobles. For spells, Twin Flame, Incinerate, Dual Casting, Bountiful Harvest, Circle of Flame, Pyroclasm, Infernal Plunge, Chandra's Fury, Leaf Arrow, Chandra's Outrage, Groundswell, and Dual Shot. With this army, I fully expected to get something between 2nd and 3rd place after seeing the other players' armies. And the primary reason for that is because I have no ranged creatures, and I'm playing an Arlinn creature control deck while she's the most fragile planeswalker. So this means that, kind of like Liliana here, if I have to deal with like a very mobile ranged threat, I pretty much have to use Arlinn to deal with it, because my other creatures they're moderately fast, I guess, and maybe I can get lucky with Phoenixes or Scions with their speed. But for the most part, like a lot of the green and blue stuff, it's probably going to require Arlinn to do some of that lifting, and she's not very sturdy while using her ranged form, unfortunately. This is a deck that I've iterated on a few times in the past, and I wanted to revisit it for this tournament. My general game plan is to use my creatures as meat shields while I stack Chandra's Fury and Leaf Arrow on Arlinn to buff her combat, while also using direct damage spells like Dual Shot and Infernal Plunge, usually on the 3-life goblins, to help trigger Archmage's Assault to either ping the enemy walker at the end of Arlinn's turn, or the next most threatening figure, like maybe a hero. Basically using Arlinn as my primary damage engine, while my creatures sit up front and die a lot. Dual casting plus one of either Infernal Plunge or Incinerate was my top counter for heroes, and I did get to use dual casting plus Incinerate to obliterate Evasian when I went against the Sorin army. So I'm glad to see that something in this army worked out. But in general, if I'm trying to use Arlinn and I have all of my creatures in front, and my opponent is playing too slowly or too low pressure, I will begin stacking power counters on my squads via Wolf Form Arlinn's Howl by slaughtering my own Phoenixes in combat, and then rebirthing them on the same turn. And that honestly works pretty well in about 2 out of my 5 games in this tournament. I was able to stack some decent power counters on my Bloodline Nobles to make them an alternative threat in some of my games. But in general, I'm usually shooting for creature attrition with this game, because the plan is to make it to the late game and then use Groundswell plus Leaf Arrow with Arlinn to hit the enemy Planeswalker, whether she's in ranged form or wolf form. I'll figure it out usually. But usually it's to use Groundswell and Leaf Arrow at the same time for 5 additional power to hit the enemy Planeswalker with something around 9 to maybe 11 dice to try and finish them off in one big hit. Unfortunately, despite attempting this big shot attack in, I think, 2 or 3 of my tournament games, I don't think I rolled more than 4 hits on any of those attacks. So the strategy didn't really pay off for me, although I executed on it otherwise. In reality, I think this deck is really similar to Liliana and Chandra. I would say it's kind of a mix of both the Chandra army and the Liliana army, as far as like, Arlinn is my main engine here, right? Like, just like Chandra is. Like, I'm buffing Arlinn, and I'm using Arlinn as my main damage dealer. She attacks once, and the hope is that either between her attack and her spells, I'll have killed the creature so I can trigger Archmage's Assault to ping another creature, or start ticking at the enemy Planeswalker. And then it's kind of like Liliana, because I'm kind of just like throwing a shit ton of creatures and a shit ton of direct damage at the opposing creatures. Like I'm throwing all of my creatures like as a meat shield because they're expendable to me. Most of these creatures are completely expendable to my build, just like a lot of the Liliana builds are. And then I use a lot of the spells to ignore toughness and just deal direct damage. I think the Liliana matchup that I played was actually pretty fun. We both pretty much melted our creatures over the course of a few turns each, and it was entertaining to say the least. I mean, so this doesn't mean this deck's a 10 out of 10. By no means. This deck is middle-ish. Like, if I had to be honest with myself, I'd probably give this deck a 6 or a 7 out of 10. Hard for me to know, because I haven't seen this deck used much. I haven't seen Control Arlinn used a lot. I home-cooked this build myself, so I don't know like its general record based on what I see online. Like, there's not a lot of talk about it, but in general, based on like my plays with it over the years, and especially in this tournament, I'd say it's something between a 6 or a 7 out of 10 competitively. I just think it definitely would fold. And speaking of folding to range figures, my only loss from the tournament out of my 5 games, my one loss was to Nissa, because it's Nissa plus Kessigs plus Elf Rangers. Because of that, I definitely would not rank this higher than green. This is very red-based Arlinn, and I think it scores closer to where most mono red builds would score because of that. So 6 or 7 out of 10 feels fair for this build. I think it was really fun though. There's a lot of lines of play for this deck, and I really enjoyed it. This feels like peak AOTP decision making to me. Next army up from the tournament is Mono Green Nissa. The creatures in this deck, we have the Elf Rangers, the Kessig Rangers, and the Path Wardens. For spells, Paths Revealed, Sheltering Word, Groundswell, Overrun, Natural End, Equestrian Skill, Naturalize, Leaf Arrow, Titanic Growth, Bountiful Harvest, Fog, and Elvish Blade Finesse. So this was, when I first saw all the armies, this was one of my top 2 choices to win the tournament. I think Nissa is one of the best monocolor planeswalkers, for sure, just because of her massive range and just how good green is in general. And especially now, given the map for the tournament event, which I haven't talked much about, the map has a river running through the entire left third of it, from north to south. Like, there's a river that goes across the entire thing. Nissa can abuse that river to absolutely dominate any army that doesn't have very threatening range figures, flying figures, or something like Blue's teleportation, like Essence Flux, Project Self, those kind of shenanigans. So yeah, that is definitely at least one part of the reason why I think this Nissa build, well, just Nissa in general as a planeswalker, is really powerful, because she can ford that river in one turn where most other planeswalkers can't. So moving into the creatures here, the Path Wardens. I'm gonna specifically jump to the Path Wardens because I love to hate on these guys. I've never been a fan of the Path Wardens. They're there to slightly help you in your ranged matchups, but I don't think green is particularly struggling to defeat ranged armies when green has the best range armies. I mean, I suppose this could help you in the mirror match. I don't know though. I feel like I'd rather just have Poma Roots or just something to be more of a frontline presence for an army that has very little frontline presence. The Path Wardens, I mean, we're sort of going for an elf army here, right? They have the Elvish Blade Finesse, they have the EBF synergy. EBF is definitely a pretty good card for Planeswalker Assassination. I've always thought the card is at least mid at best, and it only goes up if better elves are released for the game. And for what it's worth, yeah, as I mentioned for my own army review, this army was literally the only army that beat my army, and Elvish Blade Finesse was the reason why I died. I would never completely shit on Elvish Blade Finesse, but it's more that the Path Wardens aren't super good, and I hate that you kind of have to include the Path Wardens in your army in order to have a pretty reasonable chance of using Elvish Blade Finesse. As far as spells, I'm not a big fan of Naturalize. I feel like it's probably one of the worst spells in this entire deck. And honestly, throughout the entire tournament, I don't think Naturalize triggered once for the player who was using this deck in any of their 5 matches. So I feel pretty vindicated for my general hatred of Naturalized, honestly. But otherwise, this is a pretty decent semi-elf focused Nissa build. I would probably run this minus minus Natural End and Naturalize. I'd probably swap those two, but I could see myself running this army in a tournament. This is a formidable build for sure. As far as competitiveness for a Planeswalker Assassination format, I'd probably give this deck an 8 out of 10. This is definitely pretty good. Here we are, the final army of the tournament. The only one I haven't talked about, and also, yes, my other top pick for most likely to win the tournament. We have a Kiora green-blue army here. So for the creatures, we have Illusionary Projections, Kessig Rangers, and Pummelroot Elementals. For the spells, we have Project Self, Titanic Growth, Welcome to the Fold, Ghost Form, Unsummon, Overrun, Primeval Light, Jace's Erasure, Leaf Arrow, Nissa's Renewal, which, side note, this is a custom spell from the Planeswalker Arena Customs group. Then Bountiful Harvest, and Groundswell. Kiora is basically always a viable choice for almost any AOTP scenario, since she not only gets the typical benefits of being a dual-colored Planeswalker with like a massive array of choices for spells and creatures, but her two colors are, in my opinion, the best two colors in AOTP, further amplifying her advantage over most monocolored walkers. So, this build forgoes a lot of blue's control in favor of more aggressive green combat-heavy stuff. I'm not gonna lie, I'm kind of shocked at the inclusion of Primeval Light and the exclusion of things like Aether Spouts, Psychic Rebuttal, and even Blue's Lantern Geists. But this army is still definitely powerful. This is just far more offensive than what I would typically play. Then we have other win cons, like Kessigs and Titanic Growth, just one of the best win cons ever created in AOTP. Even the Illusionary Projections aren't terrible as offensive creatures, and the projections are still great supporters, so they can let you draw a card when you summon them, and then you can teleport as soon as you start your turn with Kiora. You can swap spaces with them. So, yeah, projections are they're kind of glass cannon, but they're good offensive support. And then we have something like the Pummelroots, who can frontline decently while also having offensive presence, especially with things like Overrun and their base 4 power. So everything here is a threat, or at least can be a threat with the right spells. And the total squad focus makes it easy to utilize at least some of your spells with one of your squads. If all of them gets wiped out, but there's one squad left, you could still do something with them, right? You can still put in work and put in some damage. So it's very forgiving if you make a lot of misplays and lose a lot of squads, yada yada. Yeah, honestly, one of the few things I would change about this deck is probably Ghost Form. Ghost Form is in a format where you want to assassinate the Planeswalker. Ghost Form leads me to believe you're trying to play control, and this deck doesn't really scream control to me, other than Ghost Form as like the way to murder heroes. So it's like you have this deck which can do a whole lot of damage, and you have a whole lot of mobility and healing, and then you have Ghost Form, which says, I want to kill a hero. I do feel like Ghost Form is the one that's slightly out of place here, and it's not a bad card. From watching the tournament, the player that used Ghost Form used it to great effect. Just like I used my Incinerate and my dual casting to kill Evasian, he did the same thing with Ghost Form to kill Evasian in one go, in one round, with the casting double attack. So I can't just shit on it. Like, Ghost Form is not useless in this deck, but I think something like Paths Revealed, especially to buff the Pummelroots, and it's still useful for all the other squads, but primarily for the Pummelroots to extend their threat range by 3, would have been a little bit more useful in general, in my opinion, than Ghost Form. But Paths Revealed is definitely not a requirement in a build with this many other ranged threats in it. Just let me clarify. But yeah, overall, this deck is pretty good. This one shocked me. I don't think I could have cooked this one up myself, but after seeing it, and especially after seeing it in the game, this was like by far one of the smartest builds especially for this format, that I've ever seen. This is ridiculous. Overall, I'd give this deck 9 out of 10 for sure. I think the Palm Roots and or the Ghost form inclusion here are just slightly out of place. And frankly, I also wonder if the Leyline Phantoms, or even swapping the Palm Roots for the Lantern Geist plus Eldrazi Scions, could have been a better fit for this army. So yeah, excellent build. And to also note, this army won the tournament, tied for first place with my Arlen build. So that's the end of my army reviews. Let me know what you think about my ratings for the armies. Would you give the armies a higher or lower rating yourself if you were to rate them? Let me know in the comments. There's a link to the Discord if you want to join for future tournaments, because I am looking forward to setting up another Roll20 tournament soon. Link in the description below. Come join us on the Discord. I'm happy to chat AOTP at almost any time. And until then, we'll catch you in the next Unhinged Rant.